Conor Feehan, good morning to you. Before we get to where you are today, let's talk about where you were on Friday. So you were at the funeral of Joe Carthy in Athy. Tell us about the mood at that funeral.
It was quiet at that funeral. That was the first of the funerals, and Joe Carthy was the youngest member of the group that was killed in that BMW. And while there was a large Garda presence and an obvious Garda presence around the town and specifically around the church, the funeral itself passed off very peacefully. It was quite obvious around the church before the funeral that there was going to be lavish preparations for it. There was very large floral arrangements put outside the church, and indeed even like a blue carpet and sort of velvet curtains and things. All these massive flower pots sitting on top of kind of gold columns. So an awful lot of effort had gone into the preparation for the funeral. There was also a very large video screen outside the church, and on that we could see photographs of Joe through different stages of his life, and video clips as well. A lot of them to do with his interest in boxing as a sport. So when the funeral did begin, then it was kind of difficult to tell how it was going to proceed, because the initial indications from the outside of the church were that, as I say, this was going to be a very kind of a very obviously kind of a lavish affair. But in the end, it was a very, very standard sort of a funeral. It was quite sedate. Everybody that was in the church was waiting to see how things would proceed. There was no symbols brought to the altar, really, which is a kind of a standard thing at most funerals, but not every funeral, obviously. But when the coffin did come in, it was a very large gold-coloured casket that was carried by family members into the church. And some family members then did bring framed photographs up onto the altar. But there wasn't any specific symbols of Joe Carthy's life that was brought up to the altar to symbolise his young life. And during the homily, then the priest he kept things fairly basic. Naturally, he talked about Joe Carthy being brought home to God earlier, maybe than a lot of people had expected and wanted, but. He didn't say much about young Joe, apart from his interests in boxing and fishing and that kind of thing, and he didn't talk about the other members of his friends that were in the BMW, or indeed the family who were travelling in the other car, who were critically and seriously injured in the head-on collision. And then nobody from Joe Carthy's family spoke at the end of the funeral mass.
Yeah, so there was no eulogy as such.
No, there wasn't.
And you think that was that deliberately requested by the priest and the church, that there not be a eulogy for fear of striking the wrong tone, or was there any explanation for that?
There was no explanation. It might have been the family that decided not to present a eulogy. When we cover a lot of funerals, and anybody who goes to funerals in Ireland, it's relatively standard, not obligatory by any means, but relatively standard for a family member or somebody to speak or say some words at the end, or the beginning, sometimes depending on the type of ceremony you're going to. But it was kind of markedly absent in this occasion. It was a very, very simple funeral, which kind of went against the opulence, which was obvious from the outside of the church. But look, that could be family decisions. It might have been advised to the family. We just don't know.
What about the attendance at it? Was it a large crowd? Did it spill out outside the church, and was there a lot of young people there?
It was a large crowd indeed. Many of the mourners wearing white shirts, black trousers. A lot of the mourners wearing T-shirts with Joe Carthy's image on them, and messages like "R.I.P. Joey," and the church itself in Athy is a very big church. It would have been built when mass attendance was an awful lot greater than it is today. So in a sense, while there was a very, very large attendance at the funeral, the church wasn't full, but it would have been a very large attendance nonetheless.
Was it difficult to cover? Was there any hostility towards media that you detected there?
I didn't detect any. Some other members of the media did. I was talking to some people afterwards who said that they did have some interactions, and there was some elements of tension around it. I didn't detect it myself. There was such a large Garda presence there that I think if anything had have erupted, it would have been dealt with very, very quickly. Look, there are tensions around these funerals often, especially where such a news event has, a massive impact around the country, and where everybody has a very definite opinion on things. And certainly there can be tensions, but I do think the Garda presence there helped. And while I know that some people did encounter some friction, I didn't myself.
Yeah, so heavy Garda presence there, public order unit on standby at these funerals. Do you feel that was a necessary precaution for the Gardaí to take?
Oh, I think so. Yes, because I think it's very difficult for the Gardaí to predict what can happen at funerals like this. Some of them could pass off very peacefully, but with some others, it's just hard to tell. And I think the Gardaí do have to be cognizant of the fact that there could be flashpoints. It could be something that's caused by members of the public maybe turning up and trying to express an opinion. It could be something that would happen if there's an interaction between the families and the media, who are obviously going to be there. And indeed, there could be inter-family or inter-group reactions that could be unpredictable too. So I do think the Garda presence there is advised and necessary. I don't think it was an overreaction by any means.
Yeah, so your point is about the I suppose the opulence that was on display at the funeral. Gold casket, this blue carpet, the large floral displays, both at the church and at the graveside as well. But your point is ultimately the ceremony was quite straightforward, quite dignified nonetheless.
Yes. And I didn't go to the cemetery after Joe Carthy's funeral, but I have seen footage from on social media, and certainly the banners, the messages, the flowers, and all of that did seem to travel to the cemetery as well, and there was just as much a show there as there was at the church. And I think there's been similar preparations made for the funerals that followed over the weekend.
Yeah, we're a week on now. The funeral taking place in Carlow, which is where the family, the innocent family who were travelling to the airport, who are now so seriously injured, are from as well. We had over the weekend we had this horrific crash in Middlesbrough in the northeast of England with again 5 young men in a car driving the wrong way down the motorway, killed, and they smashed into a police car with 2 police officers who were struck dead. Do you think there is still a substantial amount of public interest in these cases and this issue?
Yes, I think that the driving factor in that is that the family of 3 sisters and the young boy who were going to the airport when this BMW crashed into them, that could have been any of us. And I think that's what the driving factor in the public interest in this story is that totally innocent people going about their business. Airports are operating on a 24-hour basis, so people have to travel to them at all hours of the day and night. We've all been there at the strange hours, bleary-eyed and all of that. So here was just an ordinary family going about their business, looking forward to a wedding in the UK, making their way to the airport when this incident happened. And I think that the public support for them is because people realise that it could be any of us that could be in that position. And that's why I think it's important that this type of behaviour is curtailed or dealt with. And, there's many different theories as to how a person could go about that, or how a government or a police force could go about it. But I think it's just because the risk is so huge to everybody in the country. And that's why there is such an interest in this story.
Kim Bielenberg, you were writing at the weekend about, I suppose, the phenomenon of joyriding. Your first point was it's a very contradictory term, but it's actually gone through quite an evolution, even going back over the course of the last century, really.
Yeah, I mean, in criminal terms, it was mentioned in the US and the UK as early as the early 1900s. And in fact, the Irish Times reported in as early as 1930 that there was an epidemic of joyriding in Dublin. And a curious feature of that was it wasn't people, as we sort of hear now, from deprived backgrounds. It was well-to-do kind of people nicking cars from outside houses and just driving out of the city. It wasn't, people weren't so conscious of locking them up, I suppose. But I suppose in the 80s, it became much more pressing issue, serious social problem that, there were even marches through the city, vigils for victims of some of these serious incidents. And that's when it really kind of became a major issue.
Yeah, because back in the 80s, you did have this a scenario similar to now, where innocent people were being struck by these cars.
Yeah, I mean, I read of one incident where a woman was just cycling near her home in Dublin, and she was hit by a car and flung through the windscreen and died. And that resulted in vigils, candlelit vigils, marches through Dublin on behalf of victims. It was considered such a law and order problem at the time that the Minister for Justice opened Spike Island as a prison ostensibly for joyriders. I mean, there were other young prisoners who were put in there, but a lot of them were, around half of them were classified as car thieves.
Yeah, it was very much, it was a social problem. It was a cultural phenomenon. And you talk about not just Spike Island, but there were tactics basically employed by the Garda to tackle the issue.
Yeah, I talked to former head of the emergency response unit, McCarthy, and he said the guards at that time, they were trained, many of them, particularly the emergency response unit, to go in pursuit of these cars, and they had all kinds of strategies, like including the use of stingers, offensive and advanced driving techniques to deal with it. The feeling I got from the guards is there was less inhibition, if you like, about going on the pursuit, because there was less fear of prosecution if something went wrong. Unlike now, when, I believe there are about, I think the Garda commissioner recently said to an Oireachtas committee that there were 10 cases before the courts at the moment, to do with pursuits, and that sort of makes the force a lot more risk averse.
Yeah, so these are Gardaí being prosecuted on foot of their actions in what they would regard as carrying out their duty, but they are in effect facing road traffic offences for dangerous driving as a result of their engagement in these pursuits.
I mean, he didn't go into all the details because obviously they're before the courts sub judice in some ways, but yeah, that was the gist of it in his words to the Oireachtas committee.
Compared to the 1980s, there's a couple of issues that you were writing about as well. The first one is, I suppose, car security. More difficult to break into cars now, and immobilizers also in place. Have they made a difference?
Yeah, immobilizers mean that they're much less car theft. So the modern so-called joyriders would have to be, much more ambitious, break into houses to get hold of the keys, or have some kind of be more technically adept to take the cars. And one interesting thing was, there's the social media aspect. People saying that it's much more performative now because people are reaching potentially a global audience. But I talked to criminologist Matt Bowden, and he was saying that it always was performative because people did it in their local areas, doing wheel spins, doing these crazy maneuvers, and there was usually an audience for it. So he said it was always performative. Also, the way that joyriders obtained recognition was obviously not by social media, but through the newspapers, through the red tops, seeing stories in newspapers. That's what sort of made them feel important among their peers. And in fact, the history of it online as well, like I think it's sort of almost 20 years. There have been sort of reports online or films online of joyriding. But that was before TikTok and Snapchat, and at that time it was YouTube. And in fact, there was a high-profile prosecution reported in the Irish Independent in 2008 of this guy in County Clare who was driving around doing crazy maneuvers, effectively joyriding, and he was prosecuted and jailed.
A feature of the current debate has been, Kim, a lack of sympathy, you'd have to say, for the five perpetrators. The Garda Commissioner stating from day one his sympathies lay with the victims, that the innocent family who were travelling to Dublin Airport. We've seen over the weekend the podcast host Blind Boy. He's saying, we have to have empathy amongst the backlash directed at the five dead teenagers, and remember that they're still children. You talk about street protests in the past, obviously public pressure coming down on government to tackle this issue in the past. Was there ever sympathy for people engaged in joyriding?
I think there would have been similar noises probably, or similar statements, from people who worked with young people. Like one example was Peter McVerry, who was at the time in the 80s was very active in Ballymun, and he was saying in order to tackle this, you have to understand that a lot of these people are from very deprived backgrounds, and that sentiment, bringing it up to date, was kind of echoed by Sarah Kelleher, who I talked to who's an North inner city community worker, and she was saying, we need to engage with these people at a much younger age to prevent it happening in future. And she was saying that youth services were underfunded. they were decimated during the recession. A lot of youth clubs and youth services that would have potentially helped some of these people, put them on the right track, had been cut back tremendously during the crash. And that was her point. I mean, obviously, understandably, there's probably more sympathy with the actual victims of the crash, the people who were injured, and that's only natural. I think Blind Boy was making that point too.